Vietnam Summit 2016 kicked off. European firms positive about Vietnamese business environment. Hello and welcome to this edition of BizLine brought to you by VTV International. You're with me, Lina Pham, and as usual, we begin our program by reviewing the economic highlights over the past week. The Vietnam Summit 2016 kicked off on Thursday in Ho Chi Minh City. Organized by The Economist magazine, the event helped bring together leading voices from the government, business, and academia for the forthright discussion about the opportunities and challenges facing Vietnam. The event drew the participation of Deputy Prime Minister Phạm Bình Minh and some 250 representatives from economic organizations and economists. Representative of The Economist magazine said growth in emerging markets may be slowing, but Vietnam's economy is going strong. The Economist Intelligence Unit expects the country's real GDP to grow by 6.8% this year, and growth should be even higher next year. Vietnam has transformed from one of the world's poorest countries into a middle-income performer. Foreign direct investment is surging, thanks in part to the government's record of stable long-term economic planning. The conference also discussed industrialization and innovation for Vietnam. The Consumer Price Index in the first 10 months of this year saw a year-on-year increase of 2.27%, the General Statistics Office announced. In October alone, the CPI rose 0.83% against September and 4.09% over the same period last year, mainly driven by more expensive medical services. Growth was seen in 9 out of the 11 major goods and service groups, with the biggest upturn reported in medicine and healthcare services, followed by transport, education, housing and construction materials, and food and catering services. November CPI is forecasted to continue increasing due to price hikes in health services, oil and petrol, and food. According to the General Department of Customs, the trade surplus reached nearly $3.52 billion so far this year. It is estimated that total export value in the past 10 months reached $144.08 billion, a 7.2% increase, and total import value reached about $140.56 billion, indicating a 2.1% increase. Phones and separate parts still lead at $28.3 billion, followed by textiles at $19.9 billion. Export turnover of some processed and assembled products with high percentage of FDI surged compared to the same period last year. Export turnover of a number of agricultural products and raw materials such as rice and crude oil dropped compared to the same period last year. The 0% tariff under the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement will see more goods from ASEAN and China be imported into Vietnam, especially Chinese fruits. The government has recently issued a decree on special preferential tariffs for ASEAN and Chinese products for the 2016-2018 period, according to commitments under the agreement. Under the decree, hundreds of goods from ASEAN and China will enjoy 0% import tax to Vietnam. The goods include vegetables, fruits, processed or preserved fish, and other kinds of seafood, as well as cacao and cacao products, cereal, flour, and meat. These will create more competition for local products, according to experts. For every hour, there have been 16 additional Vietnamese enterprises established. This was announced by the General Statistics Office. Particularly in October, there have been more than 10,000 new enterprises established, with total registered capital of $3.7 billion, up 28% compared to last month. This is considered a positive sign for the economy. while the number of registered enterprises and establishment of new business activity both increase. The number of businesses shutting down is lower than the same period last year. We have just reviewed some of the economic highlights over the past week. Up next, we'll talk about the positive outlook of European firms on the Vietnamese business environment in our crosstalk. The latest Business Climate Index or BCI survey for the third quarter of this year, conducted by the European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam or Eurocham, indicates that there was a positive sentiment about the business environment in Vietnam. The results shows Eurocham members maintain a positive view on the Vietnamese market and their business operations in the country. But what does it mean in terms of economic development for Vietnam, taking into account the current implementation of the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement? We will discuss with Chairman of Eurocham in Vietnam, Michael Burns, in our crosstalk to find out more. But first, let's find out what the Eurocham Business Climate Index is in the following clip.
The Business Climate Index, or BCI, is a regular barometer of business sentiment among European companies operating in Vietnam. It provides early signals of turning points in economic activities and track movements in business confidence. In the third quarter of 2016, the index was at 86 points, 10 points higher than the previous quarter. According to the survey, over 71% of respondents described their current business situation as excellent or good, while less than 6% classified the present state of the market as not good. No responses described Vietnam's business conditions as very poor. In regards to the macroeconomic outlook for Vietnam in the next quarter, almost 60% of respondents indicated stabilization and improvement. Only 4.6% expected a deterioration. In terms of investment decisions, most responding businesses intended to maintain their current level of investment in the country, while about 2 out of every 5 were willing to invest more.
Hello, Mr. Behrens, and thank you for joining our BizLine program. Now, the Eurocham Business Climate Index indicated that the business environment in Vietnam is largely positive according to EU businesses. The figure stood at 86 points, which is 10 points up from the last quarter. So, what were the attributing factors for such an increase?
Eurocham, as the European Chamber of Commerce, does a survey once a quarter. We talk to our 900 members and we want to find out the pulse, a little bit the atmosphere. And you're correct, it's been extremely positive this time. It's always in the 70s and 80s, and now it's gone up. What does that mean? That means that the European businesses are positive about the future of investing and doing business in this country. Why is that the case? The main point is there's something I would call that is baked in, so to say. That is that the upcoming European-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement will offer more opportunities. And this, in the kind of vision of the entrepreneurs, means they're optimistic about the future. 50% said they want to hire people. There are very, very low numbers on people who want to, companies that want to lay off people. So overall, it's optimistic.
What does this figure mean in terms of economic development for Vietnam?
There's some study been done recently by the EU Commission, and actually they're doing a new study at the moment, so these are preliminary figures. I just want to give you a handful. We'd expect that import and export would rise between 40 and 50%, or another figure that was mentioned is that the average income in Vietnam would rise by a few percent, because the trickle-down effect would be so large. Let's not forget that the EU is a continent with more than 24 countries. We have almost 500 million inhabitants, and it is still the richest region in the world. So having trade from Vietnam to Europe and from Europe to Vietnam obviously should have benefits for both sides.
So future anticipation, according to the index, was also positive. So which sector of the economy can we expect further investment from the EU?
The EU is mainly, if you look at the 900 companies that are already here, and let's take that as an example, most of them are small and medium-sized enterprises. So if you look at some of the Asian investors, Japanese or Korean, they're often very large, very much into electronics, whereas the Europeans are maybe more slower and more small and medium-sized, but in the end, they're very much here to stay if they come. So I think these are a little bit different types of investment. We see education, we see manufacturing, we see supply industry. There are lots of car industries in this country. Suppliers are coming here. So it's a little bit different. And in the end, that's probably very beneficial to Vietnam because you have different types of investors from different types of regions. But let me say one more thing. That the Europeans may be a little bit slower and they're a little bit smaller, but if they come, they're here to stay. That means also the survey is rather a little bit conservative. That means the average investor brings his own money. He's maybe from even a family-run company. He wants to invest. He maybe takes some time, but if he really settles down in Vietnam and expands from here, he's not just hit and run, but he's here for long term. And that's, in the end, very beneficial, not only to Vietnam, but to the people that get employed by these companies.
Pietro has poured investment into Vietnam 5 times since it first entered the market in 2007. During nearly a decade of operating in the country, the company showed its optimism about the improvement in the business environment, regardless of some difficulties it has encountered.
Anything that had to do with international cross-border business also was difficult. But we were amazed at the way that the Vietnam government progressed through time, changed the condition, understood, listened. So that's the reason why we're here, is very much to have, because we have somebody that listens.
Meanwhile, some enterprises still have challenges with regulations and procedures while running their business in Vietnam.
The difficulties that we experience are the delays in projects getting approved, in decisions being made, and sometimes the selection process is not that transparent.
Despite those barriers, Vietnam has made efforts to improve its business climate for foreign enterprises, including European firms, to operate in the country. In the latest report by the World Bank on doing business in Vietnam, the country has seen a 9-point jump to rank 82nd in the world.
Chính phủ đã thực hiện rất là nhiều các cái giải pháp nhằm cải thiện môi trường kinh doanh, ví dụ như là thực hiện nghị quyết 19 về cải thiện môi trường kinh doanh, nâng cao năng lực cạnh tranh, nghị quyết số 35 của chính phủ về hỗ trợ doanh nghiệp. Thì đồng thời chúng ta ban hành nhiều những cái văn bản pháp luật mà có theo cái thông lệ quốc tế tốt, cũng như là phục vụ cho cái lợi ích của doanh nghiệp rất là nhiều, ví dụ như là luật doanh nghiệp năm 2014.
According to the European Union delegation to Vietnam, thanks to these improvements, Vietnam has become more attractive to foreign enterprises.
For those who took part in the survey, what aspect of business are they optimistic about?
Look, I think honestly about all the topics, which is a little bit surprising, but there was very, very little negative comment. There are a number of factors why Vietnam is extremely successful at the moment. So there's obviously the young population, there's the high level of energy in this country, there's a strong entrepreneurial spirit. But I think there's something else. Vietnam has been very smart in attracting and signing and agreeing on a number of free trade agreements. It is probably one of the countries with the most number of trade agreements in the world. There is an extreme dynamic, and that is actually how we're trying to market the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement as well. It's not only about 500 million Europeans doing business with 90 million Vietnamese, but behind the population and the business here is another 500 million in ASEAN. So at the end of the day, if Vietnam does it well, it could be a linchpin linking 500 million people in this part of the world with 500 million people in Europe. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of business. So I think this is the really the ultimate reason why Vietnam is being successful, but it has to deliver on its promises. If we look at the current economic situation, your Prime Minister has now had to pull back a little bit on the economic outlook. And that means there's no question reform, development, openness, transparency, anti-corruption work, all these things have to go on because the world is not flat and Vietnam is not the only country where others can invest. So Vietnam has to keep up the pace, but my assumption is, and the feeling of the companies that took part in the survey is, it will do its job, and therefore they are optimistic.
Roughly about 80% of them want to maintain their investment or want to expand their investment in Vietnam. So what sector do they wish to invest further in?
I think the very, very promising one is green technology and ecological energy. Our organization, the European Chamber of Commerce, is organized in so-called sector committees. That means working groups. And a very, very strong working group is the one called Green Energy. And we recently had a visit here by the UN head for climate control, Mary Robinson. She's Irish. She's the former head of Ireland. And together with us, with the European Chamber of Commerce, we visited various ministries, various government officials, and made clear that European companies want to do more. The reason why it's not happening at the moment is because I think there's a little bit of a hold-up at the moment. Government has to finalize some of the regulations. For example, at the moment it's not attractive enough to put your energy into the system. The current pricing is not attractive for investors to put their money down, but the companies are here. There are actually a number of companies producing of high voltage mechanics or panels for solar technology, and they want to invest in wind and in solar energy. This is probably also what Vietnam wants and needs. Having talked to government officials of the new government over the last 6 months, there's a lot of talk about sustainability. I think this is what it's been in the air for some time. This is what the public expects of the Vietnamese government. So I think they will deliver on this, and European companies are standing at the door, ready to put their money and their know-how in here.
Switzerland-based ABB is one of the largest technology and renewable energy solution providers in the world. Currently, the company has great hopes for Vietnam's market.
We see that in Vietnam, the potential is really big because the weather in here has an abundant source of energy. For instance, in the south, we have plenty of wind for wind turbines and plenty of sun for solar parks. The plan in 2020 is to have 800 megawatts of wind power and 850 megawatts of solar power. This is enough for more than 1 million households.
Renewable energy has attracted great interest. According to a BCI survey, over 70% of European businesses in Vietnam think that having clean energy for production is an important requirement. It is estimated that wind power potential is about 500 to 1,000 kilowatts per hour each year, and the average solar irradiance is 5 kilowatts per square meter per day. Other factors have also made Vietnam a promising market.
The fact that it's still a virgin market, the fact that Vietnam is growing faster than other countries, the fact that it has an important position in attracting foreign direct investment and new factories from Vietnamese investors. So the expected growth of Vietnam is high.
However, the development of this sector requires that various problems be taken care of.
Two are the biggest difficulties. The first one is price for the production of renewable energy as it is bought by EVN, which is de facto the monopolist in distribution of electricity in Vietnam. So the price of electricity is too low to cover for the initial investment. Second thing, because of subsidized basis of electricity in Vietnam, it is not possible for international investors to finance a project.
The Vietnamese government has developed specific strategies to promote renewable energy sector. Particularly, last year, it approved the National Renewable Energy Development Strategy to 2030 with the vision to 2050. Accordingly, projects using renewable energy will be exempted from import duties
and benefit from incentives such as land rent exemptions or reductions. Research and technologies related to renewable energy also receive support funding.
Despite all that, the legal framework for renewable energy is still being developed in Vietnam. So what obstacle does that pose for firms wishing to invest in this sector?
The European Chamber of Commerce puts out a white book every year. We are the only chamber to do this. We have chapters on each of the interesting topics. One of them is renewable energy, in which we make proposals to the government. Now, we're not here to tell Vietnam what to do or not to do, but these are proposals and suggestions from an international perspective. And when we launch the White Book once a year, we've always had phenomenal feedback with many, many government officials, ministers, and whatever join in the dialogue. And we're not here to do this alone. There are other organizations, the other chambers are here as well, the Vietnamese Business Forum, other organizations. So I think everybody's pushing the topic at the moment, bringing forward suggestions, having and developing papers. We also developed a paper, and this is all now on the table, and it has to be kind of sorted out, and I think we can all move forward.
The upcoming EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, once take effect, will remove tariff barriers for the renewable energy sector. Do you think this will stimulate growth for this sector's investment?
Yes, definitely. The EU-Vietnam FTA will remove, but also be clear, over a number of years, not in the first year, tariff barriers both ways, basically 98, 99%. So this has to lead to a better and higher exchange. At the same time, Vietnam is developing itself, so its own needs and its capabilities are growing. That means its own necessities domestically, but its own capabilities to build high-tech equipment and export that is also growing. So there's no question about it. But we don't put a tag, a number on the tag yet. It's too early. First, we want to get the governmental input. We want to get the rules and regulations set, and then we take it from there.
Once the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement is put into force, 99% of tariff barriers will be removed within 10 years in Vietnam and 7 years in the European Union. As such, more trade and investment are expected to flow.
With the European free trade, we will see this much easier way of importing and re-exporting stuff. So then we will see motorcycle coming. We will see, as I was telling before, we will see more competition, more people, more manufacturers will be able to compete even without having these high barriers to entry in Vietnam, like having to build a big factory. So that will be good for Piaggio and for the industry as a whole.
Furthermore, experts believe that the business environment will also improve for both sides.
Of standards that have been agreed internationally, and then it's more easier to comply with. So this will help the business environment. We have more transparency, more communication and exchanges and dialogue amongst ourselves. So when we draft new legislation, new norms, etc., we will also discuss. We create a level playing field, so the European stakeholders that come to Vietnam will be treated as if they were Vietnamese.
Với những cái yêu cầu của cam kết như vậy thì chúng ta sẽ phải rà soát các cái văn bản pháp lý có liên quan để mà đáp ứng được cái yêu cầu của cái hội nhập. Thì trong cái quá trình rà soát như vậy thì chúng ta sẽ biết được là đâu là cái điểm mà hạn chế của các cái quy định pháp luật, đâu là cái điểm hạn chế trong cái quá trình thực thi để chúng ta thay đổi.
For this agreement to take effect and bring positive impacts on the Vietnamese business environment, further work will need to be done before it is signed in the coming time.
Now, the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement is under implementation. So when can we expect the signing of this agreement?
The process is on the way. The treaty has been agreed. Now it needs to be ratified by all the member states in the EU and by Vietnam. The first countries have signed, and there is now an ongoing process where parliament by parliament ticks it off. The timeline should be done by the end of next year. That means in 2018 it should be falling into place. The process is running smoothly. There is no reason to believe anything can derail it. So the interesting question actually is, Why is there not enough attention on this treaty? Because there's a lot of attention on the TPP. Maybe because Mr. Obama was here, President Obama was here, and he did a phenomenal job in promoting this treaty, and maybe also because it's a very, very important treaty for Vietnam and the other member states. But our point of view as Europeans, we're not in competition, but we do want to point out that the EU-Vietnam FTA is not a dream down the road, but is something to be showing up very, very soon. And I would urge the authorities here to pay a little bit more attention, because this is something you can almost grasp with your hand.
It goes without saying that once the free trade agreement comes into effect, there will be changes to the business environment. What measures do firms have to prepare for the implementation of the free trade agreement?
There's some more homework to be done by Vietnam. The one that we mostly see is the one of training and education. As the products become more sophisticated, the training and the skills of the workers also have to keep up with it. The other topic is productivity. Productivity in Vietnam is relatively low, also compared to others. There are a lot of people doing a lot of things with full of energy, but the productivity is not very high. That means as income rises, productivity has to also be in place with that. Otherwise, Vietnam will, over the midterm, might lose out to new and rising stars in Southeast Asia, such as Myanmar, Burma, and other places. Yeah? So the homework has to be done here, but it's two-sided. The investors have to bring in sophisticated jobs, sophisticated products, and European companies are willing to do it. They're also willing to transfer knowledge. On the other hand, skills, the legal system has to keep up with this. I mentioned earlier about the necessity for new and better legislation to be able to bring green technology to this country. So it's a two-sided street, and both sides have expectations and also responsibilities. And if they both manage that well, then there's a strong growth potential.
Speaking on behalf of EU firms, what aspect do Vietnam have to improve to facilitate further investment from the EU?
I think we're at a new stage in this country now, and it's not only about more, but it's about better. Vietnam wants to move to the next stage. It wants to become from a threshold country to an industrialized country in the next few years. But by doing so, it also has to have a better way of doing business, not only more. European companies are used to this because we have clear regulations in Europe. We have very, very high standard, be it in work conditions, in technology, in environment, and we're willing to transfer and work with this. But the expectation is also that some of this is provided. In the last survey that you mentioned earlier, there was also some questions on what are the expectations of European companies. And they're very simple. They want reliable, also green energy. They want water and food safety and supplies. So nothing uncommon or unheard of, but these are things that will have to grow when more and more industry and more production and more output happen in Vietnam. So it's not only about more, but I think the next step is also about better. And having heard a number of speeches by the Prime Minister lately, the new Prime Minister, and the new government, also the Minister of Planning and Invest, who we from the European Chamber of Commerce and the other chambers had a meeting with a month ago, his point is very clearly, it has to be a new type of quality of investment that Vietnam is looking for. And I think this would be beneficial to both sides.
Thank you for taking your time to join us.
Thank you.
The Business Climate Index, or BCI, shows positive expectations for the near future and consistent satisfaction with the present situation by EU firms operating in Vietnam. This is a good sign for the current implementation of the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which is expected to strongly enhance European business and investment. However, according to the chairman of EuroCham in Vietnam, it is not just about more, but we should focus on better quality EU investments into Vietnam, which in turn will be beneficial for both sides in the future. That's all for this edition of BizLine. Thank you very much for watching. You can always rewatch our program at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.